for the introduction. And I'm really honored to be here today to be the second part of this work session. And Happy New Year, everyone. And always good to see you all. So first of all, to start off, before we talk about the last year annual report, I would like to say my sincere thank you to the school board first, because our office exists because the school board initiative to set up an independent and objective office to provide independent audit services for FCPS. So I would like to start off with that, so that also for the community members who are listening in, they are aware of this initiative and also the OAG structure. And secondly, I also want to extend my sincere thank you to Dr. Brabrand and also his team, because throughout this is my 5th year here, I always get full collaboration from all of them, from Dr. Brabrand, from the leadership team, from also all the people who are working. And I know sometimes hearing the term auditors can be quite different, right? That it's like an IRS officer is knocking at your door asking for more documents. But I always get very positive feedback from Dr. Brabrand and Dr. Ivy team, so really, really appreciate that. And last but not the least, I also want to welcome my team. So for the school board members, because you all may not have met my full team member yet, so OAG, Office of Auditor General, we have a total of 8 members. So first of all, I would like to introduce my team members at the back: Heidi, Joni, Luke, Khalid, and then at the table here, we have our new Deputy Auditor General, Mr. Chris Miuacho, and we also have Danielle and also Chris here at the table. We would like to show you, the teams that the school board has supported to put in place. We are not a huge team. However, I think together we have accomplished a lot of amazing work that we are going to walk you through here at high level today. So with that, to start off, I would like to spend the first 25 to 30 minutes to present a short deck so that you all have like some fundamental understanding of last year, our accomplishments, and then we will open for questions and answers afterwards. So just to repeat our mission, and I know that there are quite a lot of words here, but I would like to stress that why we have the OAG. The major goal is for us to independently determine FCPS ongoing processes for controlling the fiscal and administrative processes at FCPS to ensure that they are adequately designed and functioning efficiently and effectively. So my office reports to the school board via the audit committee, and we have the school board members attended part of the audit committee, and on top we also have 2 citizen members, Mr. Dan Wacko and also Mr. John Shames. Would like to take this opportunity to thank them too, that they attend our meeting and share the professional experience with us. And like I have said before, I think I really, really need to stress that is we are completely independent and objective, and we are authorized to audit everything within FCPS. And with that, would like to move on to the next slide about our team. So you can see our organizational structure. I always think that pictures tells 1,000 words, so I love to use pictures, and so you see that who we are working within the office. And also these groups are the people who really have the certifications required to conduct their work throughout. We are certified public accountants, we are certified internal auditors, we are certified information system auditors, as well as certified fraud examiners. So just want to celebrate this, hiring. It can be challenging in our neighborhood because auditors are in hot demand. So I'm glad that I picked this profession after I graduate. And so I'm really grateful for our team members' dedications. So next, talking about OAG value and how to measure it. As you can see on this chart, we looking at a few parameters and compared with some of the great city schools who self-disclose their numbers. And as you can see, when you looked at the percentage of general fund budget spent on the audit function or the number of auditors compared to our students' enrollment numbers, and also the number of internal auditors that we have for every 100 million general fund that some of these school districts spend. We are all within much better and more efficient than our neighboring school districts. So if you're wondering which are the school districts, there are a total of 29 of them, including some of the major school districts looking at the enrollment level. And I also want to celebrate that our audit plan for FY21 has been 100% completed. And again, thank you for FCPS management. All the recommendations have been accepted by management. So with that, we also want to seek internal improvements, right? So as part of our program, we conducted post-audit surveys. The stakeholders are the auditees, right? So who have been audited. So we want to get their feedback about how our audit have been conducting. Do they think that there were overall value added? Do you think that the auditors understand the concerns and be able to collaborate with them? So we strive to obtain yes responses for over 90%, and we reached that goal for fiscal year 21. And of course, there are areas that we can consider to continue to work on. But I think generally speaking, we collected very positive feedback from our internal stakeholders. And then next, so what do we do? Many times I love to describe OAG. There are mainly there are 4 pillars of work. And it started from the left, and I think I have mentioned about it many times, but I know that at the same time, audit is a very unique area, so I would like to kind of highlight them again. And then after I describe each of this area, we also want to mention about, so how does it mean to school board members? How are we working together over these 4 pillars of work? So with that, I would like to start with risk assessment. So many people have asked me, so Esther, how do you determine the audit topics for each fiscal year, right? So I think throughout the past few years that many of you now become veterans about giving me feedback about your thoughts about what we need to look at for FCPS. So risk assessment is the starting point of the audit plans. So as you can see on this graphic, that we first identify the potential topics. And then we further refine the audit topics by looking at last year risk assessments, and then also looking at the data, meaning financially, what does it mean? We also looked at our neighboring school districts and see what are the hot topics that they have been looking at. We also evaluating the result from previous year's audits or inquiries. And then we will prioritize these audit topics into primary, secondary, and long-term priorities. Primary means that we will be looking at those topics in the upcoming fiscal year. So, for example, with the school board members, we have just started the collection of your feedback. And this fiscal year, we have more than, I think, 45 audit topics that we can potentially look at. And so I would appreciate to receive your feedback until later this month so that we can consider that as part of the prioritizations. And after we collect the school board member feedback and also the leadership team members' feedback and FCPS employees' feedback, we will evaluate each area by looking at financially, reputationally, and the operational risk level, and then to prioritize them, and then we will share the result back with the audit committee and then with the school board. So going to slide 8, this slide mentions about the so what, okay, Esther talks about the risk assessment, how does it link it back to the school board members' involvement? So as you can see that currently we are in January and we're in the process of collecting feedback from various stakeholders. And then when it comes to April and May, my office will present our draft fiscal year 23 audit plans with the audit committee, and then I will present the end result to the school board, and then we will have a work session all together to discuss, and then the school board will look into approve the plan. And also, in order to prepare an agile audit plans, because we know that no 2 days are the same, especially nowadays we're in the COVID situation. So if there are any new audit topics, right, that come up outside of the annual risk assessment cycle, please kindly communicate that with the audit committee chair, and so that then we can bring it forward to discuss with the audit committee. And if there are any changes need to be made, we will be, of course, bring it back to the school board for approval. So that constitutes the first pillar of work, is a risk assessment, and then go into our bread and butter, which is the internal audit process. So this is a chart that I love to show to just explain how our audit process works, that it always starts with risk assessment to identify what are the challenges, right? And then 2 is the audit planning. So we looked into what are the controls, what are the checks and balances, are there really like major gaps exist in the process? And then we will move on into audit execution, meaning the heavy duty is like collecting all the pieces of paper to validate the objective. And then we will move on to report the result. And then last but not the least, I always jokingly to share with my auditee is, hey, don't think that after we present a report, then you won't see me again, but we will come back to follow up with all the audit recommendations that we made from the report, so that we can ensure the implementation of fidelity, that what we propose, the management accept, and that those implementations really put into place. And then with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more dry, but I think this is very important information. So when OAG conducts an audit, some people may ask, so what do we comply with, right, as an auditor? So I bring a physical book here, and many of you may be aware that is the Yellow Book. The Yellow Book is the guidelines issued by the Government Auditing Office, Accounting Office, and then within that is set out very, very strict requirements about what we need to do as auditors. So OAG adopted this as our principle for audit. So from this Yellow Book, it asked that our auditors need to be independent in mind and appearance, and then also audits need to be adequately planned and collect enough evidence. So when we go back to the wheel of audit, if you ask me, so where do we spend most of our auditing time on? It is the the planning phase as well as the execution phase in order to meet this requirement. And also importantly is we have to set up a criteria about what to be audited against. So would like to highlight that. And then the next slide is about within our findings, we will also disclose the situation about what needs to be exist, which is the condition. Again, I mentioned about the criteria. And then also the root cause, right? I think all of you would like to know about, so we know something is happening, not very good, or something that can be changed, but what is the root cause about this is happening? So we will state that in our report, and then also state the outcome if we are not fixing it. And then last but not the least is the recommendations that we make to management to consider. So with that, I would like to move on to talk about the engagement types. So I think throughout my tenure here, I collect different questions about what types of services can OAG offer to the school board. So I would like to give a little bit more colors to describe what the Yellow Book asks that auditors can do. So there are 2 columns here. The first column is about performance audits. So performance audit, I would like to say, is like 90% of what OAG is completing is falling under that category. So we have to provide objective analysis, findings, and conclusions. So over what areas, right? Over efficiency, meaning how the dollar can be better spent to do more. Also on compliance. And then also on effectiveness, meaning whether the process and program accomplishes its objective. So when we checked again objective, we oftentimes checks again the monitoring activities that management has put together as our kind of like one of the major source of audit items. And then on the right side is the non-audit services. So if I may categorize it, is for example, this last year we started to conduct a special education review. So that will fall under the non-audit service category. So it is a consulting service that we provide. Auditor independence should not be compromised, so this is something important to note too. But we will do the non-audit services when in-house, right? In-house that we don't have that specialized knowledge to conduct those services, then we will put it under that category. And again, I mean, I think that within OAG we have different types of auditors, and I'm also happy to report that this year we have hired our IT auditors so we can focus more on the IT-related controls and checks and balances types audits, and also do more data mining in order to select better samples. So I would like to highlight this slide to be able to answer or to put some of the parameters in place about what types of audits that we are able to perform. And so with that, moving on to the next slide is going to some of the meat about the audits that we completed in the previous years. And Chris is going to walk us through kind of the key outcomes.
Thank you, Esther. Good afternoon. So I'll go over the next few slides with you, starting with this list of the completed audits for the fiscal year 21. And all these audits are summarized in the annual report that was provided to you. And there's a link in there too as well, URL link if you want to see the complete audit report. All the audit reports are approved by the school board in July of 2020. And so next, I'll just move on to the individuals. Okay, thank you. The first one I'm going to talk about is the local school activity fund audit. And that's a required audit that's performed by OAG. And really, there's two focus here. One is just to determine if the financial information is presented fairly and that the schools are complying with the regulations and policies. In this case, the information was presented fairly, and overall, the schools are following the regulations and policies. The next one, number 2, is the fidelity of implementation of school board actions audit, and this is a performance audit. And one of the focuses here was to review the process by management to track, respond to, implement school board approved actions. And I'm not going to highlight all the findings here, just the first one here, but FCPS does not have a centralized tracking and reporting of school board motions and form topics consensus items. So that was one of the findings that was addressed. Moving to the number 3, the hiring and onboarding process audit. Again, this was a performance audit with 6 findings. And one of the focus here was looking at the consistency of the HR processes, both pre-COVID and COVID, related to the hiring and onboarding at schools and the central offices. And I just highlighted 2 key findings here. One is just HR operational efficiencies need to be assessed, and expansion of the principal pool to the principal pipeline. If we could move on to the next slide, please. The number 4 is the business continuity plan audit, and so that is going to be presented later to the audit committee this month, and so the results of that will be forthcoming. Number 5 is the business process audits, BPA is what we'd like to abbreviate it by. And the focus is looking at schools, divisions, and offices, the business processes in a little more depth. And this usually involves a site visit. And for the last fiscal year, we had 6 schools that we went to and 1 office. There were some moderate risk to low risk findings, and then just noted a few of the observations. Just timeliness of reconciliation and outstanding checks, lack of sufficient data. And kind of a question that always comes up is what sparks these BPAs? What what is behind our visits. And typically what happens is we're visiting the schools because there's a change in the environment, whether there's a new principal, a new financial tech, or administrator there. And so that increases the potential risk of something going wrong. And that's one of the reasons why we have these BPAs, is to go out, as well as if there's previous audit findings from continuous monitoring or another audit that might spark a reason why we would go out there. Number 6 is the continuous monitoring. And this really supports that number 1, the local school activity fund audit that we do. And last year we went out to 202 sites. A majority of them did not have observations, which was really great. But we're out there testing the financial transactions on a quarterly basis. Some of this is site visits, and some of it is doing it kind of behind the scenes in our office. As you can see, most of the audits were clean without findings, but some of the observations we noted was procurement card reconciliations not signed and dated, lack of sufficient support, and payment for purchases was not made on a timely basis. If I can move to the next slide, please. Number 7 is the audit recommendation follow-up. And this is done on a quarterly basis, and this is just really to ensure that we hold management accountable for what they say they're going to do for the finding, and that's be reported up to the audit committee and school board. Number 8 is the comprehensive program review of the special education services, and again, this is using an outside firm, AIR, to conduct this engagement, and we're currently in phase 2. And so they've already issued the year 1 interim report that was presented to the school board earlier in September. There was additional expanding of the services of about $87,000 for year 2. So that revised contract value went up to approximately $463,000. And you can see in the graph there the phase and what is going on. And so the report should be issued in the fall, in September or November timeframe. If I can move to the next slide, please. And so how can a school be involved in the audits? And so the audit reports are always presented to the audit committee, and they are, once they're finalized, they are posted on the OAG intranet site. So that's obviously a good place to go to obtain those reports. And we mentioned a lot of independence. I think Esther mentioned it 3 or 4 times already, and it's in our tagline on every slide here. But that independence is really crucial for auditors and everything that we do. So we certainly welcome feedback on reports, but when it comes to the reports, the reports should be in our own words. So just looking for clarification on edits. The second bullet, talking about the audit committee suggestions, if they go to the audit committee, will make suggestions that the report should be discussed at the full board. So we certainly are presenting everything to the audit committee, and whether it goes to the full board is up to the audit committee. Bullet point number 3, any new additions or audits that may arise is really dependent on the risk level. So OAG may propose changes to the plan. The plan is dynamic because we know risk and the environment change over the years. So if there's any changes that might occur to the plan, we will certainly present that, and it will need approval by the school board for any changes to our audit plan. And then as we mentioned earlier, the ongoing follow-up of audit recommendations, they're doing that on a quarterly basis, reporting to the audit committee, and it's also communicated to the full board. I will go ahead and turn it over back to Esther.
Then I would like to spend the last few minutes, and thank you, Chris, for the explanation on the audits. So I just want to spend the last few minutes on the last 2 pillars. One is about the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. So OAG provides employees and the general public a confidential means for reporting any suspected wrongdoings related to fraud, waste, and abuse. We have a anonymous hotline that people can call and leave a voice message. And also on our webpage, there's an online submission form that everyone can use to submit concerned situations. So we, throughout the year, starting in fiscal year 2019, as you can see the pie chart, the bar chart, it has been increasing. So I take it as a positive outcome because it's of the awareness, right, by public, by employees of the existence of the means to report. And some of you may ask me, so Esther, where are we now in FY22? So far through December 31, we received a total of approximately 21 cases. And on the slide here, you can also see the themes of the cases that come in. And then before I came into the work session, I always know that the school board members would like to make sure that our community members can access the hotline information very easily. So I just tested this before I come in here, type in FCPS fraud. The hotline submission information immediately popped up. So I just want to make sure that it is easily available, and for those of you who are looking for this means to report situation. And then how the school board members can support. So here we stated that there are a policy and regulation that OAG follows every time when a situation comes in. We take all the cases very seriously. A preliminary review is being conducted on all of them. So with that, let's just move to the last pillar, which I think is also one of the very important one, is about outreach and education, right? So even though we have done a lot of excellent work, how can we make sure our employees and our community members are aware? So you can see there are two columns here. One is about training and education. In last fiscal year, amid some of the challenges, right, with Mr. and Mrs. COVID visit, we were able to deliver virtual presentations to about 450 employees. And here I really need to give a shout out to our comptroller office because they invited us to a training where they provide to all the finance technicians and also the AAS school. So we really appreciate this avenue to train those employees. And also last year, we were able to secure a status for FCPS, which is the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. It sounds very mouthful, but what it is basically FCPS now can offer certified professional training to our employees who, for example, I am a CPA. Then I can take this internal course and be qualified to meet my CPE requirement. Again, CPE is the Certified Professional Education Requirements. And we are also hosting a DMV, District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia Auditor Group, where currently we have approximately 20 auditors to participate. They are people from the Rockville, from Montgomery County, from Arlington, from Loudoun County, where we have a platform to continuously exchange intelligence about what are the challenges and what we can do to resolve them. And then on the other column is about the Audit Bus, and Audit Bus is a periodical that we have done. So thank you for many of you have put it in your newsletters to your constituents so that they know there's a place to register. And right now our subscription has gone up to over 1,500, so we are really very grateful about that from the support from the school board members. And I also want to have a shout out for Mr. Elliott too. He is our leader on getting all this Audit Bus very timely together every month. So that's a major milestone, so really appreciate that. So with that, my only one point to put a plug in about how we can collaborate further is I encourage, if there's a space, that if you can include the Audit Bus information to your newsletters. So every month I share an email with all of you to recap about what we discussed in the audit committee and then also our audit bus highlights. So if you can kindly include that in your newsletter, that would be really great. So with that, last slide is our thank you slide. Thank you for your support so that we can continue to offer independent perspective for collaborative improvement throughout FCPS. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ko, and I appreciate, as I said at the beginning, all of your work and the hard work of your team. I have two colleagues whose hands are up right now, and I am going to start with Ms. Omesh, followed by Ms. Cohen.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Ko, and the full team. I know you guys always do some really professional work, and it's always reassuring to be able to hear the work you're doing. I did want to just follow up. I know we had some conversations in terms of priority levels for the local activities fund work. If you can just refresh my memory as to what obligates us to continue elevating that, and then I can speak further to my point.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Abra. So the local school activity funds audit is a requirement from state. So I know that, let me see who is online, but maybe if Danielle or Chris can help me with that, is a state requirement so that our local school activity funds, meaning the non-appropriated funding, need to be audited on an annual basis. So we have been looking for space, how to make it more efficient so that we can freeze up more resources to do other audits, if I read your mind.
Yeah. You know where I'm going. So.
Where we are going.
Yeah, no, thank you. Is there a reason why we don't include that under ongoing, continuous monitoring as opposed to, yeah, please?
Great question. We did include it. So basically, continuous monitoring, the result from that, because for continuous monitoring, meaning a unannounced audit. So if I can just use, that is important for a surprise audit, right? So within that audit, we cover both appropriated and non-appropriated funding. So all the feedback, like all the result from the non-appropriated funding feed into our SAF audit. That's actually the major chunk of our work. So meaning that throughout the year, we don't need to do like 40 hours a week on LSAF, no. But what we need to do is at the year end, because it's a year end audit, meaning that we do need to ascertain the June 30th balance is accurate. So when June 30th comes, we just need to ensure the balance is right, but all the process works have been done via continuous monitoring, if it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, is continuous monitoring normally done kind of randomly? Is it random sampling, right?
Yes.
Okay, but you're saying that because of the state mandate, you have to report explicit numbers? Is that the issue?
No, the state actually is very principle-based, if I may say. The audit requirement, it doesn't say, hey, FCPS, you need to look at X number of samples in what way. No, it doesn't say that. So it's up for our, development of audit program, right, to be able to give an opinion that we're comfortable with. So throughout the continuous monitoring, we develop attributes, right? For example, the Esther Code come in and work on the weekends, right? I know that now we have all hands on deck. Maybe we need to, but if we see a not a usual plan pattern, then we will go in and check those numbers.
Yeah, and so you choose to designate that, I guess, as its own section in the report because of the legal requirement, just to elevate it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I mean, I continue to think, it's just about $7 million, right, in total that we're looking at, but compared to, you know where I'm going, ESSER 2 and 3, it's over $200 million, right, that we're just going to be looking at. And I know you included that under continuous monitoring, if I'm understanding the report correctly.
Yes.
Is there a reason we didn't elevate that as its own topic? I continue to be really anxious about all that money going into schools. Yeah.
Totally makes sense, right? So just a point of clarification, Abra, for the LSAF, I think it's approximately 22 to 23.
Okay, no,
but it's
thank
still
you.
small, but it's still
Sure,
small,
sure.
so don't take me wrong. But so for the ESSER 3 funding, the reason why we put it under continuous monitoring are two reasons. One is mainly because during FY22, we are still in the getting ready stage. And of course, now is the time when the expenditures happened. For auditors, we always come afterwards, right? So we have to spend the money and we come in to check. So I think if you ask me for FY22, Two, we embedded it as part of continuous monitoring so we can see if there are any irregular trends, so to speak. And then we can think about in FY23 how to expand it, right, if the school board thinks this is a way to go. But I also want to mention that I think the external auditors, the external financial auditors, will likely be looking into ESSER 3 spending as well as one of the major audit programs. So I think I am happy, to talk with Ms. Lee Burden's team to make sure that we put enough spotlight on it, but at the same time, we don't do duplicate work, if it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious. I mean, I did look through your reports. But I didn't necessarily see anything, in terms of findings from ESSER 1 and 2 that may have informed how we now look at, implement ESSER 3. I don't know if that was something that, and maybe it wasn't done, because I know we had that conversation a little bit later when we were talking about ESSER 2 and 3. But
yeah, the ESSER 1 and 2, I don't think is included as part of the the before the school, or it's not the focus areas, I should say. But the ESSER 3 were up in the plan. It was a discussion with the school board, I think. In one of the work
I remember
sessions.
saying it from here.
So
yeah.
we make sure that is part of the audit plan. But I think we would really need to look at it. We also did some audit on grant audits before, may not focus on ESSER 1 and 2, but we focus looking at whether FCPS has systemically, right? Do we have good controls, checks and balances in place for grants? And the new money, they are all federal grants, they follow the same structure. So we get some comfort over there. But you are correct that we haven't been looking at ESSER 1 and 2 before. But it is a bigger umbrella fallen under continuous monitoring because we looked at all transactions, so.
Yeah, do you see any potential value that can come out of some understanding around what happened with ESSER 2 that may inform, as ESSER 3 is ongoing, right, the implementation of that? Do you see any benefit that may come out of that for how we might continue implementing ESSER 3?
Sure. I think we definitely are open, and my teams are all here. We can see how to include some of the ESSER 2 spending too in our continuous monitoring and see how that can inform so that we don't wait an issue to be too late, right? Be able to have a solutions earlier on.
Yeah, I don't know, Dr. Braybrand or Dr. Ivy, maybe even, if you guys have reactions to that. I don't want to be suggesting something that's entirely infeasible, but if we find out after ESSER 3, that we have concerns or that things could have been done better, it would be really unfortunate to do that after.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I would tell you is maybe I need to have some additional conversation with Ms. Coe and think about that. We do have a project manager for ESSER who's reviewed every one of our ESSER plans, and we do have plans to share that. I think you all already have beginning access to that individually, and then we're going to have a board meeting in February. But I know you're trying to think about just the money piece. Let me talk with Ms. Coe and then come back. That's the most honest answer for right now, to think about that. Her point, though, is you can't audit something when the money's just starting to get going. And I got to be honest, right? I would be less than forthright with this board that a lot of the major expenditures were just starting to take place here in late fall and here as we come back in the year, and now we're facing. I do want you to know, while we curtailed some things here in January, field trips, limiting spectators at athletics, individual ESSER tutoring is allowed to continue, and we have communicated that to principals. So the individualized tutoring for kids that was part of the ESSER plans of many of our schools, frankly, all of our schools, is continuing. We have supported that. But let me work with Ms. Coe about a way. You're trying to just check in sooner than a whole nother year to know that the funds are being distributed well.
Yeah, and when you were saying that you're just starting to implement, were you referring to ESSER 2?
Mostly ESSER 3. Now, ESSER 2, remember, was more last year. ESSER 3 was that big tranche of money we got this summer.
Yeah.
We started to work the plans. When we had the Delta variant, we changed the due date for the plan from September to October. And I'm, again, just being honest, the day-to-day schools, so their plans really were November, December, and then boom. So I don't want to give an artificial sense that schools have just, they haven't spent 80 or 90% of their money at this point. In fact, they're just starting to spend bigger chunks here as we go to the second semester.
Right.
So there's still time to think about the structure for that, and I'll spend some time offline with Ms. Coe about it.
Yeah, no, just to clarify, what I was suggesting would be it's a look back to how ESSER 2 played out to learn for ESSER 3.
Oh, I see.
That's, yeah.
Okay, I'll talk to her about that and follow up with the board on a Monday letter or a JFBB.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, not to, flood the plate. I know there's a lot, but if we're doing this work anyway, it might as well be useful, right?
Yeah,
So-
yeah, totally understand. We already started the conversation with the project manager for ESSER 3, and also with the comptroller office, starting to take a look about how to look into ESSER 3. So ESSER 1 and 2, we can definitely do that. But like I mentioned before, about that, we have looked into the grant management structure before, and it proved to be pretty solid, right? But it doesn't mean that there can be challenges, right? So I will be regrouping with Dr. Brabrand after this meeting and see if we can start testing, right, some of the ESSER 1 and 2 money as a sampling, right, to see if there's any leads into some potential problematic area.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Because I think, the structure, to your point, I know, you took a look, but the piece that continues to concern me is millions of dollars going on the school level. I mean, there's a reason we do the local activities funds, and if that's so small compared to this, there's reason to believe that, there's potential oversight needed elsewhere. But no, thank you so much. And then
Ms. Omesh, your time is up. If you'd like, I can put you on a go back.
that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cohen, followed by Ms. Tolan.
Thank you. I'm going to continue that a little bit, so maybe Abrar can help you out here. I think one question that I have is, Esther, I appreciate when you said that management has been accepting of those, and you gave a few examples. I think of one with local school activity funds where now our finance techs, in addition to their normal responsibilities, their jobs changed this year with e-ticks coming in, which apparently is really cumbersome to convert to the kind of software that it needs to be reporting, and then ESSER compliance. So we've added tremendously now to finance techs jobs, but have we on the other end made an allowance for those additional responsibilities, either by hiring additional folks or extending? You gave the example of working on weekends or additional overtime that's like comprehensively throughout the system. So if you could help us a little bit with what's your role in sort of recognizing, wow, this responsibility is too much for one human being, we're finding in this audit, and how does that translate into then HR taking next steps? Or if you don't mind just giving us a little help in that department.
Sure, thank you, Laura Jane. And I think I should look in the front. Sorry, I keep looking at the back. I thought I'm facing you, but I think I should face that way. So that's a great question. I think I also would like to get some support from Marty or Scott, if you want to chime in it, about the overloading of different job responsibilities on existing staff from management perspective. So I think from us, for example, Laura Jane, when we did the audit, I think as recent as, for example, hiring and onboarding, and I'm looking at Danielle, for example, one of the finding that we make is that when we compare, and it is not necessarily finance tech per se, but for example, when we looked at the hiring structure, for the team members there, that the number that we have compared to industry average is really below the standards. So we reported that in our report as a finding, and then we, and I think management support as well, and then we have brought it forward in our report and discussed with the audit committee. So those situations when it happens, and I think also as a matter of fact, when we are now looking at community use, similar situations occur, right? And I think similar situations occur with facilities maintenance as well audit. When we did a while back that they are, the number of employees that we have in that office were below the industry average. So we definitely report that in the report, and then also discuss that with the school board, because I think sometimes it's maybe a budget allocation questions about the priorities, about where we think the resources should put on. And then specifically with finance technicians, I think our lens, when we looked at it through the audit, is more through the lens about, okay, if there are consistent turnover rate of people, or if there are consistent heavy requirements or loading of work on a certain individuals, then problems, right, may occur. Because if you ask me to work like 12, 15 hours a day, my quality of work delivered will be suffer, right? And then it may prone for more problems or mistakes. And I think that's kind of the lens that we are looking as an auditor. I would like to defer to Dr. Brabrand or Marty if you want to talk about the resources piece.
Mr. Smith, you want to make a comment?
In terms of resources, we think about supporting the work of audits. It can be resource intense on staff to work with the OAG, depending upon the audit schedule. And for each audit that the OAG's office undertakes, there are a variety of individuals who provide input to that audit. In some departments, it could be a small, narrow swath of the officer department, and in others, it could be individuals who work across the audit or who work across the department. But I go back to what I've said time and time again is that we work very closely with the OAG's office to sort of lessen that impact on staff as it relates to staff time and working with the audit process.
And I think Marty, I so appreciate that. I think I meant more what Esther was referring to of when there is some issues where they find that people are overloaded, recommendations that they make about adding, how does that then translate into budget priorities for helping to relieve some of those issues that they find that are driven by human capital?
So then coming back with that, we then take the findings that come forward from the OAG and work very closely with the superintendent as part of the overall budget process. And so what you'll see, and there was a question in the previous work session about priorities, you'll see that some of the recommendations that have come out of different audits as it relates to staffing, you'll see some of that in the superintendent's proposed budget. And then that would open up opportunities for the board and the community to weigh in and have discussions about what those allocations should be in the future.
And does that relate to things too, like overtime and areas like that?
I don't know that we've got anything specific related to overtime. We can certainly look at this. I've heard a couple of anecdotal things from principals about it being extra. Esther's point is look for the patterns. Anecdotes are helpful, but let's look at the data to see. But we certainly, I think you'll see in the budget that's coming up, I don't want to steal all, I think we have a very good news budget to share with you all soon. And I think there'll be some room for some flexibility if we find, as this board knows, between January and May, we identify some areas where we need to do some targeted, or really even that we can reallocate some money for targeted overtime for folks that right now are just facing extra work, or that we need to actually do some extra staffing at targeted schools. So, we can certainly look at that and stay tuned. And stay tuned for Thursday, because we're very excited about, I'm very excited about sharing our budget with this board and community on Thursday evening.
I think this is a little bit for me going back to some of the CIP conversations we have when we have some systemic change like ETICS or like ESSER. We know that we're giving folks an awful lot more in their workload than they had previously had. So anticipating that before it becomes really burdensome, before we have folks coming back to us and say, I can't physically do this, or principals trying to approve extra overtime, paying for it out of their principal funds. I just want us to kind of comprehensively look when we make this systemic change. Did we add more work, and what do we need to do as a result of that?
No, Ms. Cohen, that's an outstanding point. It's a fair point. And I would tell you, one of the things I've struggled with this last, what is it now, 20 months, is almost to us, every single position in this system feels this additional impact. Now, some more than others, and maybe that's what we've got to do. Where are the targets? You know, there's a little bit more, there's a lot more, and there's I'm in crisis. And so we may need to do a better prioritization of that. And I'll work with Marty and Francis around that as we think ahead for the budget in the months ahead as you're reviewing it. Thanks.
Thank you. It's like you're teeing me up for my next conversation, which is, Esther, we talked in the fall, I think about the idea of these kind of desk audits that, to your point, Dr. Berbrand, where is the load? Has it changed? We know that part of our previous superintendent really stripped a lot of positions from Gatehouse, and we have not made that up. So that's an area of interest I would certainly be pushing for the audit committee and you, Ms. Coe, to take a look at. So thank you so much. And thank you for the amazing work you do.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. We have Ms. Tolan, followed by Ms. Marin.
Thank you. And first, let me thank you for your professionalism. I do enjoy working with you and my time on the audit committee. One of the things I wanted to ask for a little bit more information about was your new IT hire. And if you could talk a little bit more about the types of things that you think that he'll be looking into.
Sure, thank you, Ms. Tolan. So our new IT auditor is Mr. Khalid, and if you can just wave to us so they know you're here. So we are very fortunate to have Khalid join us about a month or two ago, and he is a very proud FCPS parent. And so talking about the types of IT audits, and we have been brainstorming about that. I think one of the key items, Ms. Tolan, is we have our IT audit coming up very soon. It's actually started this month. That IT audit is approved by the school board and is related looking at the project management for IT, and as well as looking at the IT asset management. So meaning the acquisition, the tracking, and also the management of that. So Khalid is a part of that. Chris is leading that effort. So we definitely can utilize Khalid IT experience on it. We're also looking at data mining as well. So meaning as part of the continuous monitoring, right? We talked about this is an announced audit. How can we better utilize scripts or attribute testing to identify the potential problem areas can be. So it's just like audit is like to find a needle in a haystack, right? If we just blindly look at it, we may not be able to find the potential problematic area, challenging areas, but with the IT auditor support, we may be able to better zoom into the potential problematic area. So that will be for fiscal year 22, where we are already in. And then looking forward, right, I think this is also one of the reasons that my office really is in need of an IT audit professional, is to think about, okay, about the risk of security, the risk of IT governance, right? What is the right model for IT leadership to be? And then also looking at cybersecurity, and I think that's also part of the security side. So the different types of IT topics, right? I may need to come back to the school board and ask, hey, school board, because this is a very focused topics with one IT auditor, we may not be able to do it all, but I think that it is a very good start, right? Then we can start thinking about what if, right, in the IT world, especially nowadays, everything becomes so IT focus. So I think that's one of the logic about when I think about a year ago to repurpose one of our general auditor to become an IT auditor, if it makes sense.
No, I appreciate that. I know there's so many topics that we really need to be looking at. Cybersecurity is always one that seems to come up. So, and I'm sure that's part of our list that we need to get back to you in the next couple of weeks about what our priorities are for audits. So I appreciate that. You mentioned something in your discussion with Ms. Omish, and I just wanted to get a little more information on our use of external auditors. So that I guess would be Lee Burden's shop that is dealing with external auditors coming in, looking at our financial work altogether. Can you talk a little bit more about your interaction with those external auditors, or if you have that, and how do you collaborate and coordinate?
Sure, thank you, Ms. Tolan. So I can explain about my involvement with the external financial auditors. So they are the auditors engaged by the Fairfax County. And then as part of that audit, we are one of the entity that is under audit. So my involvement with them historically has been they will conduct interview with me about the fraud consideration, which is part of a standard requirements by auditors. Need to talk to internal folks about their understanding the consideration of fraud. And then I also have been in discussion with them about the result from the local school activity fund as well. Do we see any trends? Do we see any patterns of challenges? And then we also work with them when, for example, if there are some systemic challenges, right? Like, for example, from some of the cases that we receive, that we see that may have a material, because for financial auditors, they always have materiality in their mind, meaning what can they not give a reasonable assurance, right? So when we encounter situations that may reach that materiality limit, and then I have the responsibility to brief them about what we are doing to identify and then to resolve the matter.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks again for all of your
Sure,
great work.
thank you.
Hi, thanks as well for your work. I always enjoy reading it and getting in the nitty-gritty. I just have two overall comments. One is, so this meeting today was about our audit, about the audit plan, the audit report, right? I'm looking at board docs right now. The Auditor General's annual report. But we're also at the same time looking at topics for next year, and that's internal documents that the board's looking at that you've given us. And I really feel like it would be helpful to conjoin those things, because as I reflect on what you've put forward as options that is in a spreadsheet that collects our input and your input, what I would really love to know are things like what do you recommend, given the breadth of what's been done in the past, what might be overdue for being done, what connects with what's been done. So like, for instance, you're looking at the IT work. Well, there's some proposals for future audit plans that include 2 more IT projects. Like now, especially since we have new expertise, what is the recommendation of the office to better dovetail and fill in gaps? I would appreciate knowing that, rather than, I see some of the recommendations that, I even made 2 years ago, and maybe they were good then, maybe they're not so good now, but help us go through our recommendations and then say, this is what we recommend and why, and now give us your extra ideas. I think that would be really helpful. I'd appreciate that, just to help us prioritize and dovetail and make more meaning. And then regarding my favorite audit that you did in this report, which is about our school board actions, I would love our board to take that information. We are in the midst of future transitions. We'll be hiring a new head clerk, hopefully in the months ahead, in the summer or fall. And so I think this is a really nice opportunity for us to really take this governance piece for ourselves and with the new superintendent, but maybe this is a task for the future audit committee chair or the governance committee chair or the chair reporting someone special. But anyway, I am really eager to know what we're putting forth. Is it really happening? And are we doing it in the way that our governance manual says, which is by the will of the board as a whole, and not, individuals or what we pick up in work sessions. So that's, to my colleagues, that's really what I'm thinking about, because I'd hate to let all this good work go to waste. And even with the audits as well, I want to see where the follow-up is happening, and could there be a more dynamic tracking of the audit work, so I can understand, you've been checking it. And so those are my thoughts. I welcome any comments, but just comments, no questions right now.
Sure, and if I may, just quickly, just to address about the first question, right, about the timing, and definitely we can look into the scheduling, right, that the purpose of this one is more to inform the school board about our takeaway from last year, and then hopefully it provides some baseline about in each of the school board members, what do you see as priorities going forward. In terms of my priorities, maybe I can explain a little bit about the process is, I guess it can be a discussion here too, is from my point of view is I want to get the school board members' independent ideas about what you think may be important when you looked at your rhyme of work. And I know that each one of you have different constituents, have different concerns, different challenges. And then we will take all of this feedback together, and then with our consideration about what rise to the significant reputational risk, operational, legal, et cetera, and then come with our recommendations later on. But we can look into changing this model. I'm not saying that this is the gold standard, but this has been what I've been practicing here and also in the previous organizations that I work with. In the package that I provided to the school board, it also included the secondary priorities from last year, meaning those are more pressing topics that if you ask, hey, Esther, can you tell us, like, what do you think are the higher priorities item? Those will be those more pressing items. But again, I mean, I think, Melanie, we can look into it further and see, hey, Esther, maybe you can change your process a little bit. I'm all up for it, like in terms of collecting feedback and when should that happen.
Okay, well, thank you. And I mean, especially with the IT piece, I think I had like 20 seconds left. I think with the IT piece, you know, again, with our new expertise, knowing that that Mr. Sethi has been looking at things like, again, what is a best practice for us to make sure that we're thinking ahead and not waiting, you know, for problems to arise. I think that's one good example of how there could be a lot of, you know, connecting and informing us to kick around and then get back. Thank you. Thanks.
Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Coe, and the whole audit team, as well as the audit committee. It has been a pleasure to see how the audit function has evolved over the past several years. You really have taken it to the next level, and your spirit of continuous improvement is very much welcomed. I, for one, am very interested in getting a little bit more on the follow-up activities of the school board, because it seems to me that what the school board is doing is exactly what the job of the school board is, which is to ask those questions and to work together collaboratively to set the priorities of follow-on motions and follow-on next steps. Where it gets lost is that we don't have a systematic approach to tracking those. And large corporations, which both Dr. Brabrand and I both know very well from our telecoms days, actually have something called either client communications or a Salesforce mechanism in which they track all of those activities. And when people take on those activities, they say, okay, this is where it is in the process. Who's got ownership for it now? Do we have to adjust the timeline? Things like this. So it is not reinventing the wheel on how to do it. It's just that we need to systematically do something like that here. So I would love to have your ideas on how we can make that happen so that it's in place for the next superintendent, because it has been something that many of us have advocated for a long time. The second area that I want to raise is, and I'm glad to follow both Ms. Tolan and Ms. Marin on this, is the cybersecurity in IT. We know from the past 36 months that the number one threat to all organizations, be it nonprofits, be it governmental organizations, be it large corporations, is cybersecurity. But cybersecurity in the instance of schools is particularly critical and risky because it has an impact for our children. But it also, I would like to see not only the cybersecurity piece, but the interaction or the intersection between cybersecurity and physical security. Because what we are seeing is an increased number of cyber threats or use of social media to place physical threats against our buildings. And so having a much more comprehensive understanding of what, and you and I have talked about this in the past, what are the risks? Because what we want to do is find a way of mitigating those risks and having a risk management strategy for this. I welcome the activity of Mr. Rao over the past several weeks of addressing the concerns over the social media, but I know there needs to be more, and I look forward to working with you and your team to figure out how we do that type of audit to make sure that your organization is working very closely with Mr. Sethies as well as Mr. Vaccarello's. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carper-Sanders. So if I may just briefly kind of comment, definitely we know that the follow-up activities to be systematic by the school board office as well as management is very super important because those are school board approved actions. So from my understanding is that the management has already put in a process, like a system in place to track, and I don't know if Dr. Brabrand or the school board clerk would like to speak about that, or?
I know we have the details around that as part of the response to that, that we are going to have a process in place with the school board office to track all the future ones. You know, as I look back on it, there was just a tremendous number of them, as you found from your review. I think there were hundreds and hundreds of follow-ons, and well, I'm sorry. This is about follow-ons. This isn't next steps from work sessions. So the follow-ons, we do have a response, and we are going to have something put in place to do a better tracking of it. And you're right, Karen. Honestly, it was something I should have looked at earlier instead of later in the process because I did have prior corporate experience like you did around it, and we're going to put it in place moving forward. So I appreciate Esther's team identifying it, and I don't know, Bev, did you want to add something else to that? Do you want to do your mic?
The system actually is in place. We've started it beginning a few months ago. We have written a blurb that will go through the governance committee for approval, which then will be then added to the governance manual, so it will become part of what we do. It is working very well to track. We do get a report. I input the motions and then send it off to staff, and then the follow-up is captured. So
perfect, thanks. Thanks, Bev. And Bev, by the way, I just want to say to the board, we have really loved, I know as you referenced that you're in the search for a new clerk and a new superintendent. I know that's a lot at once, but Bev, I can say as a superintendent, has stepped in the middle of a very difficult time. I want to give her a big round of applause. Just done a tremendous job and is also, beyond being an outstanding professional, just a great personal person of high character, and it's been an honor. There's so many people, as I think ahead to the change and transition I have to say goodbye to people. There's just some people here, so many people here in FCPS that are just amazing, and Bev is one of them. So thank you, Bev.
It's difficult. It's difficult to continue that conversation because that is priceless. But we will also, our team will be doing the follow-up on the system as well, so that we will report back to the school board about the status. Then the second comment, so thank you, Karen, about the insights into the cybersecurity threat as well as the use of social media and the actual, like the physical security threats. So we definitely, I noted all of them here, and we will put into consideration in the risk assessment for next fiscal year, and definitely in close contact with Gotham and also Tom about those special areas. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coe. And I don't see anyone else's hand up. If you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, is that?
Yeah, sorry, just very, very briefly. Ms. Carr, I really appreciate you hiring sort of IT-focused auditor, and I know that's a huge goal of yours and very helpful to you. I just have one question. Would an appropriate topic, to mention and discuss be sort of the audit of IT efficiencies, and efficiencies of our IT processes, our IT structures, our IT, I can't think of the word right now, but, and I'm thinking specifically of our 2 email system. And I don't know how familiar you are, but we have a double email system in Fairfax County. Our students have an fcps.schools.net address, and our teachers and staff have an fcps.edu address. And anecdotally, I've heard for over many, many years, and I've mentioned this to Mr. Sethi as well, that it can lead to some confusion, and emails not kind of getting from students to teachers because of this email address. And I didn't know if that's an appropriate topic for your audit department to look at in terms of efficiencies and best practices.
Sure, I think we can incorporate that into potential audit topics, rational for next fiscal year about IT efficiency or the IT governance, right, as a whole. So, but I think your question is more specific, right, to the 2 email systems. And I don't know if, Marty, you have any feedback on here now, or I would definitely put it down as a consideration for next fiscal year.
Yeah, and that's just an example I give of
Okay.
different inefficiencies. I mean, it is definitely one of my concerns.
An example, okay.
An example, but it's an example of, is that best practices and efficiencies? But it is something that I've heard and encountered myself, and I know others have encountered where an email has been sent to one, the default pops up as one, the name is the same, it's just the email address is different. So, and even teachers will get automatic bounce backs to students saying, please email me here, but students really have to look and read the email address to see the difference. And I worry about the efficiencies, especially in this world when we may have some schools that are classes where there's some asynchronous learning or virtual learning. So I really worry about that in this day and age, especially. But that's one example that made me think of that as an audit topic.
As I think in terms of overall communications, that certainly would be something that the OAG could take a look at. With regard to the specific piece of the 2 email systems, we have provided guidance to teachers to help mitigate some of those differences. And one thing that we can do culturally is work better to push those communications out so that students and parents can send to one email, and that email will then populate both the Google and Outlook systems. But we've sent some guidance out, and we can certainly push that a bit more. And then work certainly with OAG if there's anything in the future about overall communications.
Great, thank you. And I would encourage more guidance around that, because I still think sometimes the onus still falls on the students to have to really see the difference in email addresses.
No, and yeah, we will do that. We've put some guidance out. It's been perhaps a year ago, and so we will continue to push that out so that teachers know how to set up their Outlooks so that students can connect with them with one email.
Thank you.
And thank you, Rashna, too, because throughout the conversation, we talked about the types of audits. Efficiency definitely is something that is within performance audit that we can look at. So we will definitely take stock and see if we can incorporate that next year. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'll make my comments now, and if anyone hasn't had a first go round, please put your hand up so Ms. Madeja can say it. I think too, what I really think will be important, and as a board, several of you have mentioned this, the recommendations for how we track our reporting and completion of our next steps. I feel like they're at this point, and this has been an ongoing issue, but I think it's extremely important that we provide a systematic approach for that. Ms. Madeja, I look forward to seeing what your office brings forward, and Dr. Brabrand, your team and your successor. I think this is going to be really important to board efficiency. And so I appreciate the findings as well as the recommendations on this. In full agreement with my colleagues who talked about the need for the cybersecurity. Good to see the cybersecurity auditor put into place. And before I go to go backs, I will just say this, that we all have received an email from Ms. Coe to begin to give our recommendations for next year. Please work with her, talk with her. They won't be all approved until May, but she would like them in by the end of this month, the beginning of next month, the latest. So please think about this as we go through this session and move forward. And that's all I have right now. So I have one go back unless I see anybody else's hand up. All right, Ms. Omesh, this is your go back, 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. I was going to ask, I mean, so you have obviously the report and then reports attached to the report, and it's very thorough work. Kind of, you know, along the lines of what Ms. Marin was saying, but really posing this as a question, what's the regular process from here on your end? So these I mean, you have plenty of findings and then associated recommendations. Some discussion was happening around what that could look like, but from an implementation standpoint, is that something that's shared with staff to be adopted? Is that something that is just information for us as board members to then bring as motions and action items? Yeah, I just want some clarity around that because it would be a huge waste of your efforts if that isn't followed up on.
Sure. So thank you, Abrar. So if I can clarify that, is that in each of the audit report, we make recommendation to management, and then we follow up upon each one of them to see, okay, if Dr. Brabrand say that there will be a system in place in 3 months, right? Then we will come back in 3 months to validate if that is really has been implemented and also designed like based upon what we recommend the management to do. And then on a quarterly basis, my office reports back to the audit committee about each one of these recommendations, where they are. And then subsequently, I also share that list, and I'm sorry that to use this passive method, but with all these schools, I just share it as an email with you all and say, hey, here is the status of the recommendations on each one of this item. So I think for school board, the so what part, right, is more FYI, like for your information at this point. And if there is anything that we could not be able to resolve, right, I would definitely flag it via the audit committee and then to the school board, if it makes sense. So I think this is more for your information, and there's a lot of work happening underneath that. And our team is doing like the due diligence to ensure that there is a fidelity of implementation of all of them.
Right, so then the assumption here is any recommendation outlined in these reports, from what I'm hearing, will be followed up on.
Yes.
Right, okay. The understanding is that it will be implemented and then you flag anything that falls short.
Right, exactly.
Okay, yeah, so these are not just suggestions. Yeah, okay, that's helpful.
We follow up on every single one of them.
No, that's good. I wasn't sure if the action was on our end, but
Okay.
thank you. And the final thing was, I know you had a slide on the conversations we've had before about potential other ways of utilizing the audit office, as a tool in more creative ways. Can you just flesh out a little bit on where we landed there? I know I gave you a lot to chew on with the ESSER piece, so I'll leave that as the priority, but I am interested in continuing that conversation.
Sure, I think, and again, I think this is a great time, Abrar, to talk about what we should focus on because we are planning for next fiscal year work, right? So I appreciate that question. I think first come first is I want to hear from the school board where you think the priorities are, together with my own independent research, right? And also my own understanding of the system, and also what are the hot topics right now. So I think it's a mix of different things. So if I hear correctly, just from this forum is people raised the importance about the IT component, right? Cybersecurity, right? And then also maybe, I also hear about succession planning, right? We know that this can be a challenge, right? In the changeover of finance technician, the overburden of work by the school-based staff, right? By principals, we are asking everyone to do much more than what we can handle compared to the past. So I take a lot of notes from this meeting. I really need to go back with my team to look at the holistic, right, of tasks that we have. My team member, you see all of us here, we are a total of 7 auditors with 1 admin support, right? So we only have limited resources. But I think right now we have adequate number of people in-house, because I would rather to come back to school board and say, oh, now we have this upcoming new topics, right? Like, for example, 2 years ago, we have special education review, which is a very key initiative that we need to start, but internally, I don't have the resource to do. Then we can tap into the school board priorities at the time, right, to get additional funding to support that particular initiative. So it gives me more flexibility, right? Instead of having a fixed pool of people, the skill set, maybe they are not fully compatible to what the school board may want us to do, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
So right now, what we have, like I explained before, we are certified public accountants, we are internal auditors, we are fraud examiners, we are information system auditor. These are the types of people, right, the resources that we have. So if the school board, for example, looking more into the program evaluation realm, right, I know this is a very passionate topics for many of you, then we may need to think about, okay, which topics are the key one, and then we will need to solicit outside support, but under the management of our office. So it can provide more like an independence, right, oversight of the project. So I think that is something that we can think about if those situations appear. But I think for cybersecurity, for example, we definitely may need to look into hiring or engaging like an outside expert together with our IT auditor to push that forward. So we can think about the different means to do it.
Okay, yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I'll use the remainder of my time to just flesh out one idea, which is, especially with COVID, seeing what the experience was like for families who speak English as a first language versus not, which are more than a third of our population, right? And what access to education looks like for those families. Are we actually, if you want to look at it from a FAPE, are we providing information and access and all of that? That's a potential angle, but it doesn't have to be. And just the consistency there of, when a family's first language is not English or don't speak English at all, I know Helen Lloyd can speak to this a lot more than I can, but just the deficiency that's there is a potential area. There's so many more, but from an equity standpoint, I'm hopeful that that's a possible idea in the future.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Somesh. And I see Ms. McLaughlin has returned to the meeting and would like the opportunity to ask questions. Ms. McLaughlin, is this your first go around? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Koufax. And to my colleagues, I will certainly debrief with Ms. Koufax and Ms. Ko, and my staff aide was also taking notes, so I can review what I missed in the conversation. But this is something that I feel very strongly about. How do we most effectively draw upon the strengths of having the Office of the Auditor General? And so one of the things that I've asked Ms. Ko over the years is that while we as 12 individuals hear from our community, and that can help inform what we bring to each other and to her as possible, audit areas of focus, in the end, day in and day out, it is the Office of the Auditor General and her team who intimately understand doing the risk assessments and the risk assessment management, and then being able to look at how do you triage all the different areas that maybe the 12 of us find of interest, that the senior leadership team find of interest, but how do we strategically build this audit plan to really make it the mission critical focus of what are the greatest challenges facing us in terms of operational, legal, reputational. So I do hope, Ms. Ko, I heard you say it and it made me smile, that you do recognize that we are relying on the expertise of you and your team to say to us that while we on the outside have lots of different good perspective, in the end, we're almost relying on you to take everybody's feedback and then really try to professionally identify where it is we need to focus. And, I do know that Dr. Brabrand has mentioned a number of times, appreciated by me and many, that with a complex operation, we do need to have a more sophisticated project management process within our system. And so I did want to just make sure that that was sort of really put to the forefront and in everybody's minds, that I think that's something we as we emerge out of the pandemic, and to Ms. Omish, I think many of us are right there with you, that when you get over $200 million from the federal government, it can be deployed with good intentions. Is it effectively being deployed? And since it's multi-year, I do hope that we will also make that a very significant focus for the OAG, so that in these multiple years, we're going to continue to expend the funds in the best manner possible. I would ask Ms. Coe to something that Ms. Omish said about the COVID experience for our ELL families versus our non-ELL. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about the difference between you and the Office of Research and Strategic Innovation, because I would think that ORC, either you and ORC can do this together, or this might be more of an ORC type research project. And I think it's important to delineate that.
Sure, and first of all, thank you, Megan. And I know Megan and I have been working in the audit committee on different issues for a long time, so really appreciate for your feedback and your thoughts about how we can better, collect the feedback from the school board. And yes, and I appreciate the school board entrusted us with the authority or the first step to come up with a risk assessment with the plan. That definitely we see this as our job, to put something together that consider all the major risks. So I just want to assure you with that. So about the EL versus non-EL, about the COVID impact on them, I think at this point it is pretty outside of my existing staff, core competency to review. And again, it depending on what are the objective, right, of the review. If the review is to assess what is the learning gaps, or how can we bridge that gap, that will be outside of my wheelhouse. But if we are looking at how much did we spend on improving, and what are the monitoring activities, for example, that management say they are going to do, then is within, right, what we can do. Is very, if we can go back to the yellow book criteria, is very clear about what we need to check. And so I think it's really depending on what we need to look at in those situations. Can we work with Aussie? I think absolutely. The only thing is about the independence line that we may need to discuss a little bit more, because for us, we are completely independent, and Aussie, they have a lot of great industry experience, and they are working under the superintendent. So there's something like that we may want to think it through. So we can either work with Aussie, or if budget is allowed, maybe we can hire like an outside expert to work with us on it, if this is a topic that collectively as a school board thinks it is important. I hope that it makes sense.
Thank you. So to my colleagues, thank you for this and your thoughtful questions. Remember, the plan for next year, feedback is due by January 28th. We will send out a reminder. And Ms. Coe and your team, thank you so much for your hard work, your continual hard work. We appreciate your partnership and your professionalism as you go through some of these very difficult topics. And Chair Pekarsky, if there's nothing else, can I end this work session officially for the day?
Dr. Brabrand has more questions about audit.
Please, Dr. Brabrand, go ahead. All right. Thank you so much. And today's work session is complete.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good
virtually
afternoon.
And here. Thank you.
Thank you.